So now the glucose levels or the sugar levels in your blood tend to go up. And that is where the problem occurs. So this is called insulin resistance. Guys, welcome to another episode of the Dr. Akash Show. Now today I want to talk to you about something that is affecting more and more people globally and a skyrocketing rate in the United States. It's affecting younger and younger people as well, including children. And that is insulin, and specifically insulin resistance. I'm going to talk to you about what insulin is, why is it so important anyway, what causes something like insulin resistance, what are the symptoms that you need to look out for to determine if this is beginning to become a problem in your life, what it actually causes, what are the actual health implications, and then of course we'll talk about solutions that you could incorporate right away. By the end of this video, you should be able to incorporate some of this stuff that's either free or inexpensive. And then of course, as always, we'll discuss rituals and routines to keep you resilient and robust. Now guys, this is a brand new podcast, so if you find any value in this, as always, please like, share, and subscribe to other like-minded people so we can get this exposed to more people like us. So let's get into it. Insulin resistance. Now, before we discuss insulin resistance, we need to understand what insulin is and why we have it and what its actual effects are. Insulin and insulin resistance is a term that we're hearing more and for good reason. So technically, insulin is actually a hormone and a peptide. It's a signaling molecule that signals your body to perform certain activities. Specifically, insulin signals your body to take glucose from the bloodstream and deposit it into the cells. Those cells specifically are fat cells, muscle cells, and liver cells. So you have glucose in your bloodstream that's broken down from the food that you eat, and that is your primary source of energy. Then insulin signals that glucose or allows that glucose to travel through a channel or a doorway into these specific cell types to feed these cells so they can continue to perform their activities, increase energy, and just allow you to live your life. That's ultimately what insulin was intended to do. Now, the term insulin resistance refers to when our body is doing a good job of releasing enough insulin to get that glucose into these particular cells, and your system is functioning just fine. However, sometimes you can cross a threshold with overexposure and just too much glucose in your body where your body gets overwhelmed, and now the insulin isn't as effective as it needs to be. So even though your body is releasing increased insulin to fight the higher glucose levels, it's just not as effective as opening those doors as it once was. So now the glucose levels or the sugar levels in your blood tend to go up, and that is where the problem occurs. So this is called insulin resistance. Your body is becoming resistant to insulin. Insulin is the key to open the door to those cells to allow glucose in. Insulin resistance is when that key doesn't work as well as it used to, and the doors can't open as often. So what causes insulin resistance? The primary causes that we understand so far include obesity, smoking, sleep apnea, a lack of exercise, and a poor diet. Eating a lot of fried foods with high saturated fats, sugary drinks, and there's overexposure to sugars that our body was never intended to see because of all the processed food that we now have access to is what ultimately causes this overexposure and overload of your physiology and your system. So ultimately what happens is your insulin begins to go up to fight the increasing glucose levels. The key isn't working as well in the lock as it used to. This is all caused by the things that we just talked about: smoking, obesity, sleep apnea, poor diet, lack of exercise, right? Then the problems really start, because then you can become symptomatic with something called the metabolic syndrome. Now, the metabolic syndrome caused by insulin resistance specifically consists of these four things. The metabolic syndrome is composed of diabetes, high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, and obesity. Now, once you develop the metabolic syndrome secondary to the insulin resistance, you are now at increased risk of things like cancer, heart attack, and stroke. This is why it's such a big deal. Not to mention the individual problems that you will experience with each of the disease states that we mentioned under the metabolic syndrome. For example, if we take a quick look at diabetes, insulin resistance leading to the metabolic syndrome, which is composed partially of diabetes. Now, diabetes in and of itself can lead to things like blindness, can lead to things like delayed wound healing, can also lead to peripheral vascular disease, where your blood vessels are just not functioning the way they should. The tunnels are getting smaller and smaller, so you get less and less blood flow to the affected areas, specifically the extremities like the hands and the arms. This can lead to cell death, amputation, all of these things, and that is just diabetes alone. Then we look at things like hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, obesity. All of these things, they have their own individual host of side effects and problems as a chronic disease state. So think about the metabolic syndrome almost as like the mother of these chronic diseases, right? The mother chronic disease state. And underneath that, you have all of these other individual disease states that are very, very dangerous in and of themselves. So this is why insulin resistance is such a big deal and so catastrophic if it's not caught early, because it becomes very difficult to treat. And sometimes you just can't treat it because, the ship is just too far down the road and you can't turn back. So how do you know if you're developing metabolic syndrome? What are some signs and symptoms that you can look for in yourself? Of course, get your laboratory work done. I can't stress this enough, and I talk about this quite a bit. However, that being said, if you're at a point now after listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if this is something that I need to be concerned about. So this is what you can look for. These are typical symptoms that you will see with insulin resistance: increased thirst, increased urination, increased hunger, blurred vision. If your vision is suddenly getting more and more blurry or accelerating at a faster pace. Slow wound healing. You cut yourself and it takes much longer than it normally would to heal, right? Or you're noticing, it's taking a lot longer than it normally does. Maybe you have some like random skin infections, like you notice little areas and little sores on your skin that are just like these little localized pockets of infection, and headaches. So these are the primary set of symptoms that you need to look out for. If you're starting to notice, hey, I'm a lot more thirsty than I used to be, I'm urinating more, my vision's a little blurry, I got these headaches, I got these sores on my skin, I'm not healing as quickly as I used to, start thinking very quickly about getting your laboratory work done and confirming this diagnosis or maybe something else so you can accelerate getting treatment. Now, speaking of treatment, what is the treatment for something like this? If you can catch insulin resistance early enough, you can certainly reverse course or slow down the progression. This is one of those disease states that is truly kind of brought on by your habits. There's no doubt about it. So if you catch it early enough or you change those bad habits that we talked about earlier, you can kind of nip this in the bud and change course immediately. What can you do? Pretty much the opposite of everything we talked about just now, right? So I said the causes of this include obesity, lack of exercise or sedentary lifestyle, poor nutrition, sleep apnea, and smoking, right? So we basically just reverse those things. If you're a smoker, just stop. That's completely in your control. Stop destructing yourself. That's just a way to spend a lot of money on literally something that's killing you. So save your money, don't intake the poison. Number two, a lack of exercise. If you find yourself kind of gravitating more and more towards a sedentary lifestyle, reverse course. Starting with any physical activity is better than none. And be realistic. If you're starting from zero, then start slow. Maybe take a walk around the block 3 times a week and slowly escalate as your activity allows. But just stay consistent and build momentum. Sleep apnea. Now, sleep apnea basically suggests that when you're sleeping, your airway constricts and you have a lack of oxygen delivery to your body. These components can contribute to insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome. So if you have sleep apnea, if you're a snorer, that's the biggest giveaway. Get that looked at by a sleep specialist and consider treatment. That treatment might include a CPAP machine or something like that your sleep specialist will speak to you about. But get tested immediately because this is controllable. Being overweight or obese, in addition to all of the other problems with being obese, all of the inflammatory issues that come with that I discussed in a previous podcast, this is another reason to really focus on making sure your weight is at an ideal range and you're not in the realm of obesity. Because you're obese, that in and of itself is a risk factor to develop insulin resistance, leading to the metabolic syndrome. And don't forget, part of the metabolic syndrome is also obesity. So you create a feedback loop that becomes harder and harder to break. And then, of course, diet. You know when you're not eating what you're supposed to be eating. Let's just keep it real and be honest. We all do. Of course, we all cheat a little bit here and there. I am no exception to that. Of course we do, right? The problem is when you're consistently consistently cheating, and now your cheat day becomes your normal diet, right? If you're consuming things like sodas, high sugary drinks, like, quote, juice drinks and things of that nature, a lot of fried foods on a regular basis, not as a treat or a celebration, but more of a regular consumption routine, it's become your habit, that is a problem. Ideally, one should think about that almost like a drug, right? And it's a drug that you might be addicted to. So you need to taper off of that and shake the addiction. Otherwise, you're going to have health consequences down the road that can be catastrophic. If you're not sure where to start on your diet, in addition to measuring your macros, as I always talk about, your protein, fat, and carbohydrate intake, think about it like this. Lean more towards lean meats, things like turkey and fish. Lean more towards increasing your fiber intake, right? These types of small changes, in addition to measuring what you're taking into your body, will allow your nutrition to kind of shift to a more positive direction. But of course, measure it as well, because if you're not measuring something, you're not really progressing. How do you know if you are, right? So as always, I like to discuss rituals and routines that you can use starting right away to become more resilient and robust. So in this case, in discussing rituals and routines, the first one that comes to my mind is exercise, right? Because exercise has been shown to have so many benefits that we've talked about and we will talk about further. However, in this particular case, exercise has a twofold benefit at a minimum. The first benefit is exercise directly will help combat insulin resistance, fighting everything we've talked about. And as you begin to exercise more and increase your level of physical activity, guess what? You're going to lose more weight because your diet is also going to be cleaned up as well, right? So you're working on things on both ends. But the best thing that you can do, in my opinion, if you're not already, is to exercise on a regular, consistent basis. Your nutrition. These are things you can control. The first thing to do in respect to your nutrition is get a measuring tool. Get an app that's something that's free or inexpensive online. You can always message me directly if you need some suggestions, or just leave a comment in the comments section down below and I'll reply. But get something that allows you to track your macros so you have a clear understanding of what you're actually taking in, regardless of how healthy you might feel that you're eating. Sugary drinks or beverages. You know when you're drinking is sugary. It takes 2 seconds to look at the back of a label and look at the added sugars, right? You see a lot of this in like energy drinks, things that are advertised or marketed as fruit drinks, sodas. These are the real killers. The best way to start is water, just pure water. If you are in this position and you're making this switch to something like water, I've heard it before. I know what you're going to say is like, I don't like the taste of water. Oh, I can't drink that much water. Oh, it feels weird. Whatever the case may be. Listen, at the end of the day, your body is like 85% water. You are water. Spoiler alert. You're like 80% water, right? So if you're not drinking just water to some degree, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're literally not giving your body literally what it is, right? Now, of course, there's a place and a need for something like electrolytes as well. But if you're making this switch, absolutely utilize the electrolytes maybe one time a day. But don't forget to drink water to catch up, okay? You need it. It's like oil for your car. It's like lubricating your joints. So important. And it's extremely important in a case like this. Now, speaking of electrolytes, one of the best rituals and routines that you can add to your morning is drinking 1 liter of water right away. 1 liter of water with electrolytes in that water immediately upon waking up is the best way to kickstart your day. Better than drinking coffee in the morning or any other stimulants, because you will find that will act as a natural stimulant for you. Why? Because when you're sleeping anywhere from 6 to 8 hours a night, you're dehydrating all night. You're not taking in water. Your body's still undergoing functions. And if you're one of those people that wakes up kind of sweaty, guess what? You've lost even more water. So in a case like that, you certainly need an electrolyte-based water beverage to replace what you've lost overnight. So that 1 liter just gets your day going. But throughout the course of that day, the current recommendations are 3.7 liters of water for males and 2.7 liters of water for females. These rituals and routines, to summarize, increase your level of exercise, but be consistent and be realistic with where you're starting, and set up a plan so you can be sustained with your practice. Now remember, the reason for that, exercise being the first one in this case, is not only does it have a direct effect on insulin resistance, but it will also allow you to lose weight, hopefully combating any sort of obesity you might be dealing with. Number two, your nutrition. I think we've beat this one to death on this podcast, but your nutrition is of a paramount importance. Common sense things like cut out the fruity, sweet beverages that you might be consuming, specifically seen in things like energy drinks and other beverages labeled as fruit drinks. Okay, take a look at the back and look at the added sugars, and you'll be shocked. And of course, obvious things like if you're smoking, stop smoking. Save your life, save your wallet. Cigarettes are so expensive these days anyway. You know, this is like a quick fix for so many areas of your life. Develop these rituals and routines right away, immediately after you finish this video. Bookmark this video so you can come back to this list that we just talked about at the end, and you can refer back to this as you begin to escalate and improve your lifestyle. And as always, guys, we focus on keeping you resilient. Now, resilience means your ability to face difficult situations and move through them and past them as quickly as possible and continue to move forward with your life. How do you do that? By optimizing your machine that God has given you, by optimizing the Ferrari, which is your body. And how do you do that? We've discussed some ways in this podcast today. Refer back to other ones in the past. And the goal of all of this is to keep you robust, right? Robust means becoming the most powerful version of yourself. And how do you do that? You do that by incorporating these changes one by one so you stay consistent and it's sustainable for you, right? If you're not sleeping well, get your sleep in order immediately. Just try it for 30 days. You have nothing to lose. You have so much to gain. If you just try it and it doesn't work for you and you don't see any improvement, then go back to your normal habits. But what if it does, guys? What if it does work for you and your life actually changes, right? What if you stop becoming that person talking about it and you actually change your life? Think about that. Your exercise, get that on board immediately, right? Get your exercise on board. It's going to make you more resilient, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically as well. You're going to be much more in balance with your neurochemistry, your physiology, and you will see you're going to be able to tackle issues and cope with stress much, much better. These are the types of things that we need to focus on. And bigger picture here to kind of wrap this episode up is if you choose not to, you run the risk of developing insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome. Now you have to worry about things like going to the doctor on a regular basis, having prescriptions that are ongoing that are both expensive and inconvenient because they have their own side effects. Maybe you're going to end up having an amputation or you're going to go blind. This may sound extreme to you, but it's not. I see it every single day in my practice, right? So make the changes today. So guys, if you found any value in this at all, please like, subscribe, and share it to other like-minded people so that we can expose this information to more people like us and help more people. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Dr. Akash Show. And as always, remember the best time to do something was yesterday. The second best time is today. Don't look back tomorrow with regret. Take one small step today to get yourself maximally optimized. Thanks for tuning in.